Well, hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. I am Catherine Boyle from Key Ministry, and today we're going to be talking about a topic that has a word in it that maybe is not familiar to you, but the concept probably is, and that is parentification. And so we're going to be talking about how to recognize it, how to prevent it, and how to do some repair. And you may be coming at this from the perspective of a parent or maybe a ministry leader, or maybe somebody in a helping profession. So, we want to address, this topic from all those different angles. So I am joined by a couple of wonderful ladies today that may be familiar to you, maybe not, but either way, Lisa Jamieson is a writer for the Key Ministry team, has written for us for many years, and is a mom of a daughter with disabilities, and also a mom of a couple of other children that do not have disabilities. She has talked about these kinds of issues frequently in her writing for us. And then Jolene Philo. Jolene is a writer and speaker like Lisa. Jolene has written often about impacts of disabilities, not only on the individual experiencing, disability of any kind, but also on the family members. And so, we definitely wanted to hear from both of these ladies. Jolene also has a background as a longtime teacher and educator. And she speaks often about trauma and the impacts of trauma. So ladies, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so a couple of quick things. We are recording. So if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat here on if you're joining the webinar live, or if you're in the Facebook page and watching the webinar, feel free to post a comment. I am flying solo today. Beth is not able to join, but we will work those into the conversation as we're able. So just wanted to let you know that, and don't use identifying information, but do feel free to ask any questions or post a comment if you have them. So well, I thought it might be helpful to start with a definition of parentification, because this might not be a word that you're familiar with. But as I was doing some reading and homework on this, what became very clear is that parentification is when maybe an otherwise well-meaning adult puts adult-sized responsibilities on a child's shoulders. So using that as a kind of a jumping off point, is there anything either you, Lisa, or Jolene would have to say, to kind of elaborate on that? And Lisa, I'll start with you, but, we can definitely go back and forth as, the conversation flows.
Well, just probably as a starting point, I would just say I also wear the hat of a Christian temperament therapist. So I understand this from a temperament perspective, in the sense, not personality, not in the sense of how we behave outwardly, but how God wired us inside. So for example, somebody who is just born, from the moment they were woven together in their mother's womb, they were born with a servant's heart. We see that in kids early on. Sometimes there are going to be certain traits that were woven into us that are going to be really wonderful strengths that we carry throughout our lives, but there's also the potential vulnerability in any one of those traits. So a servant-hearted person, for example, is going to be recognized often as that by the time they're a toddler or preschooler even, and they're therefore vulnerable in a certain way because of that trait, having too many things put on their shoulders. And I could make a list of the different traits that are all wonderful strengths in life, but can make us prone to either by our own initiative or by a parent's inadvertent need for help, or any random wonderful other reasons, we might fall into kind of these traps.
Jolene, what would you add to that? Is there anything that you've seen maybe from a little bit different perspective, maybe as a teacher?
Yeah, as a teacher, what I saw with some of the students who had disabilities, if they had a typical sibling in the same building and there was an issue, I saw far too often that the teachers or someone in the staff would go and get the sibling to help deal with that.
Right.
So that's something, that's how educators contribute to the parentification.
Mhm.
And we have to be mindful of that. I'm sure we'll talk about that more as we go on. And also just from my personal experience being raised in a family where my father had disabilities, my sister, brother, and I had to do a lot of stuff that kids don't normally do. We as adults need to realize that the typical siblings don't understand that this is anything out of the ordinary.
Right.
They're assumed that every other kid has the same responsibilities. So
Right.
the issue may not really come to a head when that child's within the family and
Right.
growing up. It may happen when they get out in the world and find out, what? Nobody else did this?
Right. Right.
And so it's kind of that, it's kind of a thing that if we can start addressing it early, we can avoid having those repercussions much later in our adult children.
Mm-hmm. Right.
To also just add that, it's not all bad. Like our
That's
kids
right.
are growing up with some wonderful, unique perspectives on life and work and that kind of thing. So there's nothing wrong with being part of a team and supporting your family team. What we're talking about, just to be clear to everybody else, is that we're all trying to find the right balance,
Yes.
And part of even finding, even when we get the balance wrong, I have found in my own family that as long as I'm super, super diligent and proactive about showing appreciation, showing respect, expressing gratitude and affection, and acknowledging, just recognizing the efforts that any person in the family is putting in any given moment, will go a long way to covering some of our struggles with this issue. And then I'll probably come back to this later, but just making amends, because we are going to get it wrong. We're not perfect parents. So understanding, even on a spiritual level, what Jesus taught us about how to make amends and the importance of that, and doing it quickly, whether it's with a spouse or even our own children. We are modeling wonderful things. So I'm kind of maybe jumping ahead to solutions, but I think it's worth mentioning right at the front that we're raising kids who will be leaders that come to life with a perspective that's so incredibly valuable.
Yes.
Some of that will come from even how they've learned from the mistakes that their parents have made and how their parents recovered from mistakes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, so we kind of already jumped into some of the negative things, and some of those negatives, as Lisa said, can be very positive experiences long-term. Even challenges can help develop resilience and draw out strengths from us, from the way that we're wired. If we will allow those things to be used constructively, if we do lay down healthier patterns for ourselves and extend forgiveness and grace and all those kinds of things. But what are some things that you've seen, families who have disabilities, have a child with disabilities, and then have typical children? What are some ways that you have seen the parents do a really great job of meeting their kids' needs? Because I'd like to highlight the good things that people do too, because those should definitely be emulated within families. And then, that's good information for ministry leaders and parents as well, teachers as well. Sorry.
I think what I've seen in talking to parents who've done it well is that they let other people into their lives so that the children don't have to bear so much of the burden and can have that free interrupted time, whether that's the form of, they're able to hire somebody to deal with some of the things, whether they have a cadre of friends who are willing to be trained to help with some of those things, or if they're willing sometimes to let other people that they trust take their typical siblings and do the typical things with them that the family can't do when the child with disabilities is there. That's probably the biggest thing I've seen.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. I, talk a lot about having a robust support system. And I know from firsthand experience, how easy it is to be defensive about that, because most of the time we're not going to get the kind of help that we need or ask for. And yet I believe this more and more and more strongly the older I get, that for all the things that I tried to do for my kids, advocating for a great IEP and trying to get the best medical care and whatever it is that we're trying to do, so working so hard at, there very seldom will be anything that will be more grateful that we worked hard at than trying to cultivate a robust support system around ourselves and our family and our children. Because that's something, whether it's a couple key people or a broader system of support, it's something that we will carry with us throughout a lifetime. And it helps fight some of that fear as parents we have too, because you feel a certain peace or comfort in knowing that even if there's a lot of people just out in the periphery of our lives, they're going to be there for our family long after we can be there, even if it's just emotional support. You know, my girls who will help coordinate care likely for their sister someday have cousins that live far away. And yet they know they can pick up a phone, because those cousins, even if it's once a year, have spent several days 24/7 in a house where we're all celebrating Thanksgiving or something, and have a perspective on what day-to-day, moment-to-moment life with Carly is like, and they have a compassion and a supportiveness, even from that little glimpse, that a lot of cousins don't have, because they only see them for a couple hours at a time, rather than all the way through from wake up to bedtime and maybe middle of the night sounds too. So I would just echo that we'll never regret the effort we put into just being patiently perseverant about cultivating that support. And then I would just try to quickly add that making a safe space for our kids to have their own voice, have their own story, to be forgiven, to be asked for their forgiveness, to have their privacy, and not just physical space like in a bedroom necessarily, but even having their own friendships, having their own opportunities to go places, do things.
Excellent.
So a safe space means a lot of things. Grief, you know, we could talk a long time about how siblings go through seasons where they will experience grief in their own way, and often it will look like anger at their sibling, and parents will start to panic. Oh no, they're not getting along, or they resent their sibling with special needs or something, and they need to give that child space to have their feelings. In our house, we just worked really hard to make sure our kids knew that they could have their feelings, and they needed to have a way to express their feelings, but they always had to be respectful about it.
Right. Yeah. Feelings are basically a boundary, and parentification is an issue where there's a chronic lack of proper boundaries, basically. And it's interesting to me that you both touched on revealing vulnerabilities, because that's a thing that the book that I've read and the other online information that I've read talk about how people who end up parentified as adults, they find a very difficult time revealing their vulnerabilities. And it's so interesting to me that that's part of the Christian journey, is being able to accept that, you know, we do have weaknesses and that we're part of a body. We can't do everything on our own. And that, you know, even like Revelation 12:11, that says that the word of our testimony and the blood of the Lamb is what overcomes. That, you know, by having a testimony, that, you know, our testimonies include things where we are not strong in ourselves. And so I just think it's so interesting that you know, that the solution, or, you know, a thing that can help people kind of come out of that when that's been their experience, is to, you know, to be more open, even if it's just with one person, you know, or starting with prayer. You know, it is something that there's something deeply important about being able to be vulnerable, that will lead to healing for us. So just a quick reminder for those who are on the webinar, or those who are participating via our Facebook live stream, feel free to add a comment or a question, and we will work these in as we're able. So one thing that I thought was really interesting is that, if you have a child who is, let's say, late elementary school, maybe middle school, one indicator of a child who is being parentified is conduct issues that are not consistent with who the child seems to be. So maybe the child seems to be this very mature, very responsible, kind of person, but then they do something that's completely out of character and maybe destructive. All kids make dumb mistakes, right? But then teachers tend to like sweep that under the rug because they just can't believe that this child who is, normally so straight-laced is doing something that, just is completely out of character. So Jolene, did you have any experience seeing kids that you just kind of felt like there was something a little bit off with this kind of behavior?
I don't know, as I saw so many typical siblings that had children with, or had a sibling with a disability, but I did see that kind of thing sometimes. Some of it has to do with what Lisa was talking about just earlier about their temperament. I remember having one student who was so straight-laced that he would report his own misconduct to me.
Right.
Yeah, and I was like, you know what? I'm the teacher. You just go ahead and be the kid. And when I see something that needs addressing, I'll address it. Whether it's you or the other kids, you just go ahead and be a kid.
Yeah.
You don't, this is my job and I get paid for it.
Yeah. Right.
So just kind of,
parents can
yeah,
take
just
a lot from that.
I think as a teacher, what I tried to do for those kids and how I dealt with those issues, I would bring them up to the parents if it was serious. As a rule, it was not. And what I found was that if I created in my classroom a safe space where kids could be safe and have kid-sized responsibilities, that gave them a reprieve, from some of the things that they had to deal with at home. And what I would also say is that this parentification issue is also prevalent in families where one or both parents are dealing with addiction. Because very often the child has to take on the role of the parent who's got substance abuse issues.
Yes.
So, I think as teachers, what we can do best is provide that safe space where they can be kids and think like kids and have the responsibilities of kids. And then if we do see things that are concerning, we need to talk with the school counselor. We need to, possibly talk to the parents, though that can be difficult too, because the parents are already dealing with a lot and may get very defensive.
Absolutely.
My best thing is always, you guys are dealing with a lot as a family. Have you ever thought about maybe getting some family counseling? I think it would help all of you.
Right. Well, and sadly, in addition to addiction issues, sexual abuse and parentification often go hand in hand.
Yeah. Any of those dysfunctional family things that, we all have dysfunction to some extent.
Right.
But where it gets way out of balance, then we're going to see that come in.
Yeah. So
Physical, and we all have certain needs. We need food, we need oxygen, we need a livable temperature.
Right.
If it gets too cold, we'll die. If that's why we have furnaces. And these are undeniable physical needs that we have. And the same is of our soul. Our souls are wired with undeniable needs. And so what you're going to see with your children often is that they're seeking something. They probably won't be able to even articulate to you that they just need a hug, for example, or need some special time with dad, or they need eye-to-eye communication, not sideways while mom's doing laundry. And this is not to heap guilt, but just the reality. As caregivers, all of us, we have certain needs, and we know that part of when stress mounts is because those needs, those core needs aren't getting met. And self-care is wonderful and important and valuable, but a pedicure is still not ultimately going to fill the hole in our soul. And the same is true of a child. So this attention-seeking behavior, for example, that can look like emotional intensity, or throwing out their misbehavior to draw attention, might be, I need something. What is that?
Right.
You know, and parents, I think, especially in some of the generations even previous to the ladies here, the mentality was often, well, don't reward that, or don't give them what they are clearly wanting, because that'll just make it worse. Well, I think we've learned some things about the reality that actually, if we do the very thing that as parents we might be recoiling from, like, this child does not seem very huggable to me right now, but in fact, this tantrum throwing child or misbehaving child may need a hug or some time with me, maybe not right this moment, but at my earliest opportunity, more than anything else. And then a lot of other things might fall more into place. And I get it. We don't have a lot of bandwidth and time to do some of these sometimes, but I was just talking to another mom this week about ways that you can multitask, like sitting down with a friend and saying, here's what I know my child needs right now. I don't know how I can possibly do that. And thinking with somebody outside of the situation about how can I even make my getting the laundry done or making dinner more of a collaborative opportunity for this child who needs more of my attention. I might have to slow down a little bit, but if that fuels the soul of my child differently, it's different to do that as a connecting, emotionally connecting activity than I need you to help because I'm so busy.
Right.
And we might even have a certain intention and convey something different to the child. But if we can go into that with great intention, like, if you would rather bring a puzzle over and do it at the table while I make dinner, that's fine. But I'd love it if you wanted to do it with me, not help me. Even the difference in the language. I don't need your help. I want your help. I would enjoy this. If you would enjoy it, let's do it together. Or go do your own thing, but giving them choices and empowering them rather than making them feel obligated to responsibilities is a really different tone and a really different result in the relationship.
Yeah, and I think about most people get around, transportation wise by car, and some people have long distances to go to take their kids to school or to events, and it's always very tempting to want to put them on the bus or to put them in somebody else's car. But, those kind of moments there, that time in the car is precious time. And I mean, even if you do, especially if you do have to rely on your child, maybe more than you would like to, that can be an opportunity where you can just listen, and you don't always have to have an answer or, a good response, but just being able to listen. I remember reading years ago in a parenting book, something about, just asking the child, well, what do you think you should do? As a question to let them know that they have the choice that you're talking about, and that they have some accountability for their actions, and that they have agency for their actions. So, I mean, it doesn't always have to be like a super, well thought out plan. Just take those moments where you have them, already in your daily life. So,
Catherine, we actually have on our website a free download of a conversation starter tool that you can use not only with your kids, but there's 2 pages to it. One is for starting conversations with your spouse, but one whole page is just ideas of questions that you could ask in that exact kind of scenario to just get your kids talking, and even building self-awareness for them about what they're thinking about and what they're feeling about everything. And I'll just confess, I struggled with this because I'm a talker and I didn't listen enough. And I was always quick to edit I had to really learn to, and I'm still learning, to just let them have their answer. There will be plenty of opportunities later for me to give some of my own perspective, but my daughters, one of them in particular, will often remind me that I should wait to be asked for my ideas. And she's right. But as parents, we feel like we're always parenting from that teacher perspective. And there is a time, the car is the best one for just listening. And if anything, just asking a lot of questions. And not a barrage of questions, but I mean a lot in the sense of just optimizing any of those opportunities in a really relaxed, safe way.
Jolene.
Yeah, I'd like to circle back to the thing about attention-seeking behavior. I think we also need to look at that. I think there's something underlying the attention-seeking, and that is that when kids exhibit those behaviors, they are testing the boundaries. And when it's kids who are having to do adult kind of things, they really want to know that they are safe and that their parents have set up boundaries for them.
That's right.
Early on in my teaching career, I did gifted and talented, and I went to a speaker who said the most stressed out kids are the kids that know they're smarter than their parents, because they're still kids and they need their parents to set those boundaries, and they may not be seeing it. They really don't want to be the parent, they want to be the kid.
Right.
And what we have to remember is that even if we have to ask our kids to help out some in ways that are more adult, we also need to provide the boundaries of saying, you know, you don't have to worry about that. And when we see those attention-seeking behaviors, those are really security-seeking behaviors. And we need to set those boundaries then for them. And I think once that, they may kind of fight you at first because they've had more freedom, but eventually they're going to realize, okay, I am safe and I can rely on my parents.
Right. Or even if they haven't had more freedom, I think that there's sort of the illusion that they have more freedom because they have more responsibilities. And so, you know, you kind of expect that, you know, when your responsibilities are this big, that, you know, that's the space in which you have to move and you do whatever you need to do. Instead, when you're a kid, it's actually this big. So
I really have to jump in if I can here, because first of all, thank you for bringing that up. It's such a great point. And I will say there will be kids who will actually seek out more responsibilities for any variety of reasons. You've got your natural born leaders who like to have influence and like to lead and like to make choices, and it's not their business, you know, so they do need that permission, like Jolene talked about, not just permission, but a flat out boundary where a parent says, you are not the parent here. I am the parent, you know, and it's hard. Because then we have to care for their soul. They may feel rejected or they may feel devalued in that. And so we have to show appreciation and respect, but show them this is not your spot. This is not your moment. There may be a time I need you for something more, but it isn't now, or it isn't today or this year or whatever. But you also have these kids who will have a heart for the cause of you know, or they'll have a season where they have a heart for the cause, and then another season where they want nothing to do with the cause. Right. You know, these natural born advocates, for example. And then kids who are seeking significance in some way. They're needing to know, where do I fit in the scheme of all this? Because there's this sibling that's always got to be so important. And because of their maturity, they may understand they have to be important. I get it.
Right.
But still, you know,
right.
And so we have an opportunity in that case to help our kids learn that their significance doesn't come from what they do. Their worth is not about how they're performing. It's an opportunity to help them understand their identity spiritually, that they're ultimately first and foremost a child of God, not a member of this family.
That's right. And I appreciate you talking about that because the research that I read through, and I'm just going to show a picture of this book. So it's Lost Childhoods, The Plight of the Parentified Child by Dr. Gregory Yurkovic. It was excellent and so insightful. And But he talked about how when people have been parentified as children in adult relationships, they tend to be the fixers. They're the givers, you know, and other people tend to be the takers, you know, and I mean, if you're honest, you've seen that, right? I mean, you might feel like, okay, I tend to be more than one than the other. And one of the things that was commented on in the book is that people in the helping professions often have been parentified. And, you know, that's a little bit of an ouch for those of us who are ministry leaders on this call, right? But you know, what is experienced as a child, you know, the boundary issues, but there's also not that reciprocity. You know, there's not the respect of the child's boundaries. There's not, you know, the putting in place proper boundaries, perhaps by the adult. And so, you know, as they move into adult relationships, it's very easy for them to continue being in relationships where there isn't really that actual reciprocity. And that's something that needs to be corrected as an adult so that they don't end up in relationships, whether, you know, we're talking about romantic relationships or just, you know, kind of in a mess as an adult where they don't really understand what they want. I'm gonna actually read a quote of a therapist or a psychologist who's online, and she goes by the online Twitter handle as the holistic psychologist. But she talks about how adults who've been parentified have been conditioned since childhood to ignore how they feel and prioritize the needs of others. And they tend to find adult relationships where they try to fix, rescue, or enable, just as they did as children. They struggle to understand what they actually feel, what they actually think, and what they actually need. You know, a little of this sounds a little bit like, you know, a horoscope. It can mean anything, but I think that there is a lot of truth in what she's saying, that parentified adults also feel a deep feeling of being misunderstood, of not being considered, and deep loneliness. And many fill this void with constant busyness, always on call for other people's crises or issues. This fills the familiar childhood need to feel wanted. And the most important step in healing is learning to set boundaries. So, any comments?
Model that as parents, you know, we can make all kinds of excuses for not doing our own self-care, not working at these robust supports and using our every respite opportunity we can, having those date nights and things. We have to remember that we're also modeling something to potential future caregivers or care coordinators.
Right.
If we want these kids to be involved in any way in their siblings' life in the future and supportive of the caregiving process in any way, because that can mean all kinds of things. We need to model to them how to take care of themselves. And it's one thing to be aware of what you feel. It's another thing to expect other people to read your mind about what you're feeling, which in our family has certainly been an issue. And we learned early on that can very easily happen when you have a child who's not verbally communicative. Because my daughters have grown up so intuitive about sensing what people need around them, and then also resenting when people around them don't know what they need, because they've just learned, they assume or expect that everybody functions that way. And like you said earlier, so many of these things they don't discover until they're teenagers going to a sleepover somewhere else or something and seeing the inside the walls of another home that, oh, it isn't like this here at all. These things that I thought were so normal are not normal at all.
Right. Jolene, you want to say something?
I would add to we do have to model the boundaries. And one of the easiest ways is at mealtime when you eat together. We now live, our daughter, son-in-law, their two children who are 7 and 4. We live in an intergenerational home. So there's 6 of us at supper and everybody wants to talk. And one of the most effective things I think we're using right now of recognizing boundaries is, okay, you get to talk now, tell us about school or your day or whatever. And we're constantly having to say, no, now you can't talk yet. It's this person's turn. Every single night. But it shows that every child, I mean, the kids get equal time with the adults, but the adults get equal time with the kids too. You can do that with that kind of thing when you're riding in the car or whatever. You can set boundaries of, okay, I want to hear about you right now. And, you know, pretty soon then the child with the disabilities comes into the conversation. No, we're talking about you and what you need. Don't worry about the other child right now. Tell me what you're feeling. And then we have to monitor ourselves too, because it's going to be tempting. You know, it's kind of like when you're married and after you have kids and you go for that first date, what do you talk about?
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And we have to work against that tendency so that we're modeling boundaries in our thoughts, in our conversations. And then by doing that, we're illustrating that everyone in the family has value and you have the right to set boundaries too.
Right. Well,
Sometimes the kids will need to talk about their sibling. So
absolutely.
It just can't be the full conversation.
Yeah, I also would make sure they understand that, especially when those are big and potentially negative feelings, they need to happen where that person who has disabilities is not in earshot. So they learn, you know, you have your feelings, those are important. I want to hear them, but we can't have this conversation right here. We'll either have it later or we'll move to a different room or something like that.
And again, that's a boundary issue. That's a boundary issue for the person with the disabilities, because they're a person made in the image of God who has every right to be respected and loved, just like every other person. So,
and even if they don't cognitively understand the conversation, they can sense the spirit of
absolutely.
And again, even if they don't know it's about them, the tension in the room, a lot of these, if they're developmentally, cognitively delayed, like my daughter is, she still very much senses. The older she gets, the more she does. The stress, the anxiety in a conversation, or even when there isn't conversation going on, just so in tune with that, and it affects her anxiety level too. So
absolutely. So, all right. So for ministry leaders who may be watching this or, you know, providing counseling to a family, or, you know, just aware of a family that has a lot of challenges and has disabilities, you know, it can really be difficult to tease out, you know, what's the chicken and what's the egg in the scenario. I mean, you know, recognizing that there's a person who requires significant care, you know, that should be one thing that ministry leaders should be aware of, that, you know, it does add a layer of complexity and additional challenges that other families do not have. I mean, it should not need to be said, but, you know, maybe we need to say it. So, you know, if you're a ministry leader in that situation and, you know, there's maybe some challenges going on in the family, you know, what are some things that maybe you would encourage the ministry leader to either be on the lookout for, or, you know, advice or just an approach to take with the family to try to help a child who maybe, you know, seems to be going down a path that's not a good one. And I'll just give an example. I mean, I'm aware of a family that I've known kind of in my community, and it's obvious to me that there is, it's a single parent home. It's obvious to me that there is an issue with the mom, and most likely over relying on one child who was a model child in many ways, just, you know, great student, blah, blah. And in the last couple of years has really just kind of taken a dramatic turn. And I mean, so I mean, I know there are efforts to try to help this parent, but, you know, if somebody comes to you with that kind of scenario, like, you know, and you're talking with a ministry leader, what are some things that you might suggest for that ministry leader to be helpful in a situation like this?
Go ahead, Lisa.
You know, there's like a couple of different branches of where to go on this. One is that the leader needs to have a conversation with the parent, but from the perspective of how can we help surround you with more support so that you have more freedom to be the mom that you want to be.
Right.
That kind of thing. Also, a conversation among the leaders in the church that anybody that touches any part of this family about how they can make, especially time at church, but even beyond that, potentially a safe place for each member of this family. And I'll just throw in one example because talk about this a long time, but I actually did a webinar a few years ago with one of my daughters, and it wasn't Beth, somebody else at Key Ministry interviewed us. Barb, it was Barb Dittrich. And Erin said when she was in youth group, it was very, very difficult when it came time in small group to share prayer requests because her prayer requests always felt so big. It felt awkward to share them for a multitude of reasons. And I was even awakened to that. When she said that, I never thought about it quite that way. And how powerful would it be for the youth pastor, the small group leader, multiple small group leaders to understand that that's what's happening. And I don't know that there's an exact answer. It's unique to different situations, but just an awareness on a lot of this. Awareness alone goes a really long way to helping us just pray and rely on the promptings of the Holy Spirit in our own hearts and our own intuition that God has put in us to be sensitive, more sensitive to things. We can't be sensitive to something we don't know about. So I don't, you could do a whole training in this for these leaders, and yet truly just being aware that prayer requests is a pain point for siblings. And just sensitivity to that, and then prayerfully being sensitive, it changes everything. You don't need to go through a whole workshop on how to facilitate prayer in a small group to be able to make a change there. So I just think of having some of these conversations, not to be behind anybody's back, but to build awareness about where these spots of opportunity might be is really valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's excellent.
I think what I would add to that is that I think the ministry leaders need to continually remind the parent and the child that this isn't the end. What we're seeing right now is not the end of the story. And if this child seems to have taken a big change in their personality and is pursuing different things, that's part of their childhood, and they're still growing and maturing. And tell that to the parents too, this isn't the end, because they're like, well, now my child that I didn't have to worry about, I have to worry about.
Right.
Well, and kind of help normalize it also. There are periods where we have to worry about all our kids. So what can we do to help your child feel loved and secure again? What are some things we can do as the church to help with that?
Yeah, it's never helpful to parent out of fear. And when you stop and think about a lot of these scenarios of what parents end up doing inadvertently or out of desperation that are ultimately harmful to their kids, it's often fear that it's at the root of it. And so the parent, helping the parent remember spiritually that we can trust in the Lord with all our heart and lean not on our own understanding, that these seasons will pass. And like you said, normalize it. There were a lot of times, even as it related to being part of a team and having to take extra responsibilities at times, where it really helps to point out to our kids that not everything is about the disability. And to remind ourselves, not everything that's happening right now that's challenging is all about this disability issue. Kids go through seasons of challenge, of rebellion, of all kinds of things. And while that may be a factor, we can't always just blame it about that. Just like when I needed to go take a shower and said, you guys, keep an eye on your sister for a minute while you're watching TV. She's fine, she's playing, but I just don't want her to wander toward a toilet and fall in or something, you know what I mean? And I'd get the eye rolls, I'd get, mom, and I'd be like, you know what? I don't care who she is or what her issues is. This is not about Angelman syndrome. This is about you being part of a team right now. Kids sometimes have to watch their siblings for a minute while mom does something. And it's not because Carly has disabilities. So just, you can feel frustrated, but I want to remember, I just was trying to prevent them from resenting the disability all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Part of a team.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think it's always important for ministry leaders to know, kind of where, if this feels like something that's beyond your ability to, to provide pastoral type counseling, then by all means get professionals involved, because, things like this tend to have multiple layers. I mean, particularly when we're talking about, a disability being present in the family, then, that's a layer of complexity that maybe 90% of the families in your church or in your ministry will never have to deal with. But because of that, then, as a ministry leader, you just may not have experience or an awareness of some of the issues that are maybe very obvious in that family that you're working with. So family systems therapy can be incredibly helpful to tease out some of those different layers and begin to put the boundaries back in place where they're appropriate, and accountability, on all sides. I mean, not just on the parent side, but certainly on the children's side as well. So
also support the accessibility of that counseling by potentially subsidizing even a portion of it.
Absolutely. That's a great use for benevolence funds.
Before Larry and I even had Carly, we were in a terrible marriage storm at one point and needed counseling ourselves. And we were in a church at the time that had a relationship with a specific counselor who would spend a certain amount of their week in the church office, like in a room, providing counseling to church members that was subsidized by the church. We would not have been able to get that quality or a faith-based counseling of that nature without that kind of an arrangement.
Mm-hmm. And I would just add quickly before Jolene jumps in here that so much counseling now is subsidized through, or not subsidized, but like you can pay for it if you have a healthcare spending account through your health insurance. You can pay for that sort of thing with those funds. And so many therapists often anymore offer their services online through this kind of appointment. But goodness, even if you have to go in person a couple of times, a lot of times they'll be really accommodating if they know that your schedule just won't allow you to come for an in-person visit very often. I mean, years ago, I had a really challenging season and I had seen a therapist sporadically. And so she would just call me when she had an opening in her schedule. And I would literally go, if I was out shopping or at the Y or whatever, I'd go get in my car and have my therapy appointment on the phone. And it was such a gift to me that she was willing to do that. And I'm sure she's not the only one. So Jolene, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's fine. The other thing, in addition to financial subsidizing, we may need to provide care for the child. Some of the children, many of the people watching, maybe if they're parents of a child with a disability, you can't get away from the house. That's because right. You've got to watch the child. So either, maybe it can be online and somebody could just keep an eye on your child, or, you might just need to provide some people who would be willing to watch the child during that time. So both parents or whoever can go to the session.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent point.
Those kind of sessions myself where the child just is attention seeking the entire session. And we have the blessing of being able to do it virtually. And yet at the same time, that mom is having, or dad or couple is having a really hard time focusing on receiving the benefits of that, even the encouragement that they could receive during that session if they're so distracted. So it's kind of, just finding somebody who can even just sit in a room nearby and hang out with them on the iPad or put them in a stroller or a wheelchair and take them for a walk.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what we're talking about requires us now to just back up as ministry leaders and church bodies and realize that we need to be getting involved in the lives of caregiving families way early.
Mhm.
You know, right after a diagnosis or right after a family moves into your church, we need to be reaching out, not always a ministry leader, but you need to have some people and know who they are, who are going to be willing to maybe bring them a meal if they need that, or even see that, oh, you know, I could take their kids to school in the morning with my kids because it's really hard for this family to get out. Or when
Right.
I was a child, we had some people in our church, an elderly gentleman who didn't have any kids. He would take us to the Easter egg, the community Easter egg hunt on a Saturday morning every year till we were older than we should have been going. And my mom had to gently tell him, they're a little old for that now. But he realized that my mom taught all week, and Saturday morning she couldn't be taking us to the Easter egg hunt, and my father wasn't mobile enough to do it. So find those ways that you can get inserted into a family. So when those needs arise, you already are comfortable with the kids,
Right.
and they're comfortable with you, which is even more important. And that you have some agency yourself to step in and say, here's what we can do and help, because it's already a safe place.
Yes,
I agree.
absolutely. You know, some of the information that I researched for this talked about how critically important churches can be in the lives of families with disabilities, for the child that does not have the disabilities to have a place where they can grow. They don't have to be right underneath their parents' feet all the time. They probably don't have to be in the home all the time, and they can really develop their own interests, their own friend group, and become their own person, separate from the responsibilities that maybe that they do have at home. Yeah, I was just going to quickly say too that years ago, a family where the husband was, you know, had mobility issues and, you know, in a wheelchair, he wanted to be in a small group. And so it was incredibly hard for the family to get out another time during the week. And so the men's small group met in their home for years.
Yeah.
And, you know, they became very close friends. And I mean, it was just really, there was nothing to it, really. It was just basically being sensitive to another person's needs, and then just being willing to be a little bit flexible. So you know, we're getting up close to the top of the hour, but I want to end on kind of a positive note, because, you know, this is a challenging issue for sure, but there are, you know, even if this is something that has happened in your family, if this is something that you've done to your children and you are recognizing it, or if this is something that happened to you, you know, there are positives that can come from this. You know, Genesis 50:20 says that Joseph said to his despicable brothers, you know, you meant something for evil, but God meant it for good. So even if it's something that in most cases is thoughtless, or it's just, you know, not being aware, God will use it for good. So, you know, I would just encourage you to, you know, if this is a place where you need to start encouraging your child who, you know, is a typically developing child, just as Lisa and Jolene both have said, you know, encourage that child. Don't make everything about how they can, you know, do things for you or for their sibling, but really give them that space within their home, or you know, at school, or in extracurriculars at church, to be able to develop, you know, who they are, and leverage some of these things that you know, these attributes that have developed in their lives, so that, you know, they can be the person that God called them to be. So I'd like to give you ladies a chance to have a last word. So Lisa, if you would just go ahead and share a final thought with the audience.
I guess I'll piggyback on a thought I had as you were just sharing the story from Joseph. There's a lot of parents in scripture who screwed up royally.
Yep.
A lot of parents who did really, really well. And, you know, we should consider our children fragile from a parenting perspective, both ways. You know, Joseph's story started with parents who were showing a lot of favoritism, and God was not happy about that.
Mhm.
But it's a story of redemption all the way through, and how God really did use what was meant for evil as a great, great good, and the saving of many lives, you know.
That's right.
We see over and over scripture where there were really wonderful parents and the kids still fell apart, you know? So on some level, we can't, it does not help to, and it isn't what Jesus would want for us to live in shame or fear or regret. He gives us outs. He gives us opportunities to recover, and he can heal anything, and he doesn't need anything to start with. He created the world from his spoken word, you know? And so when the romance in a marriage, it seems dead and there's nothing to start from, when a relationship with a child at any age feels utterly broken, God can rebuild that, because that's what he's in the business of doing. So praise God. There's opportunity and there's lots of help around. You know, like we started with Jolene's comment, asking for help is the hardest thing for us to do. And it perhaps is one of the most important things we'll ever do.
Yes.
It is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. And we will, in the long run, be happy if our kids see us modeling that.
Yeah, excellent. So Jolene, your final thought?
I would just say we as parents need to be praying for opportunities. If we know we've messed up, that we can talk calmly with our kids and confess and ask forgiveness and listen to our children. And then I think we also need to be praying for them that the life they have lived, speaking about this from my own perspective as a parentified child, that God can use that for good. I mean, I wouldn't be here if I hadn't started out as a parent of my father and learned how to do all this stuff. He will take that and he will hear our prayers on behalf of our children, and he will use them and our children for good.
Yes, yes. Amen. Amen. Well, thank you, ladies, both so very much. This is an incredibly important topic.
Yeah.
We did not have any comments in the chat or on the Facebook live stream, but I am sure that there may be people who would like to ask something. So if you do have a question, but you didn't either want to submit it now or you think of it later, feel free to reach out to me using the Key Ministry website, keyministry.org, or my email address is Catherine@keyministry.org. So ladies, thank you so much for joining us. If we don't talk sooner, have a blessed holiday season, and follow us on all of the socials to see what we have coming up next at keyministry.org. Thanks so much.
Bye.